The Galactic Council chamber had never felt so empty, despite housing representatives from over 300 civilizations. Ambassador Zethkar of the Vortanian Empire shifted uncomfortably in his crystalline seat, his four eyes scanning the massive circular hall. The human section remained vacant, their chairs gathering the fine cosmic dust that filtered through the station's atmospheric processors. It had been exactly one standard galactic year since humanity had simply left. No dramatic speeches, no threats, no demands for justice or compensation. One day, Ambassador Sarah Chun had been debating trade regulations with her usual passionate precision, and the next day, the human delegation's quarters were empty. Their ships had vanished from the docking bays. Their communication channels had gone silent. Every human colony, outpost, and vessel had simply disappeared from galactic civilization as if they had never existed. The motion to redistribute former human territories passes by unanimous vote, announced Chancellor Veltar, his voice echoing through the chamber with an authority that fell hollow. The amphibious leader's skin had developed stress patterns over the past year, dark blotches that betrayed his growing anxiety despite his attempts to maintain order. Ambassador Krixna of the Hegemony clicked her mandibles in satisfaction. The insectoid's compound eyes glittered with an emotion that might have been triumph. She had been one of the loudest voices calling for human expulsion from the Council, citing their aggressive expansion and dangerous unpredictability. Now, with humanity gone, she had claimed 6 of their former colony worlds for her people. But Zethkar felt no satisfaction. The Vortanians had been humanity's closest allies, or so he had believed. He remembered the long nights spent in discussion with Sarah Chun, debating philosophy and sharing cultural insights. Humans had a unique perspective on conflict resolution that had proven invaluable in several interspecies disputes. Their absence left a void that went beyond empty chairs and silent communication channels. The first signs that something was terribly wrong had appeared 3 months after humanity's withdrawal. The KRYLL Confederacy, a militant species from the galaxy's outer rim, had begun expanding aggressively into sectors that had previously been considered off-limits due to human presence. Without the implicit threat of human intervention, the KRYLL had grown bold. The KRYLL have seized another system, reported Admiral Thosran of the Centaurian Defense Fleet, his scarred face grim with concern. The reptilian warrior species had fought alongside humans in the border wars 20 years ago, and he understood better than most what humanity's absence meant for galactic security. The Proxima colonies. They're demanding tribute from all civilian traffic passing through their territory. Chancellor Veltar's throat sac inflated with stress. Have we received any response from the Terran government regarding this matter? The question hung in the air like a toxic gas. Every representative knew the answer, but hearing it spoken aloud somehow made it worse. No communication has been received from any human authority for 367 standard days, replied the Council's AI secretary, its synthetic voice devoid of emotion. All attempts at contact have resulted in complete signal loss upon reaching former human space. Ambassador Krixna's mandibles clicked dismissively. Perhaps now the galaxy will learn to solve its problems without relying on human interference. The KRYLL expansion is a matter for the affected systems to handle themselves. Zethkar's primary eyes focused on her with barely concealed anger. Easy words from someone whose territory lies safely in the core systems. The KRYLL are testing boundaries that have existed for centuries. Without human enforcement of the neutral zone accords, we're looking at the potential collapse of the entire Outer Rim security framework. The heated exchange was interrupted by an urgent chiming from the chamber's communication system. A holographic display materialized above the central podium, showing a haggard-looking Altarian fleet commander. Her usually pristine uniform was scorched and torn, and one of her antenna-like sensory organs hung limply against her skull. Council, this is Commander Yelsan of the merchant vessel Starlight Dreams. We've just escaped from the Vega system. The KRYLL they've done something unprecedented. Chancellor Veltar leaned forward in his chair. Report, Commander. They've enslaved the entire population of Vega 3. Not conquered, enslaved. The planet's inhabitants are being worked to death in mining operations. We tried to intervene with our escort ships, but the KRYLL fleet, they had weapons we've never seen before. Energy cannons that could punch through our shielding like it was tissue paper. A cold silence fell over the chamber. Slavery had been outlawed in civilized space for over a millennium. The practice was considered so abhorrent that even the most aggressive species had signed treaties forbidding it. But the KRYL had apparently decided that traditional galactic law no longer applied to them. Ambassador Trillex of the Pacifican Assembly, a being of pure energy contained within a shimmering force field, spoke in harmonics that translated into urgent concern. This represents a violation of 17 major galactic accords. Where is the enforcement mechanism? Who will stop them? The question echoed through the chamber like an accusation. For centuries, that answer had been simple. Humanity would stop them. The humans had possessed both the military capability and the moral conviction to enforce galactic law when others would not. Their fleets were powerful, their tactics innovative, and their resolve legendary. Most importantly, they had been willing to pay the price in blood and resources that enforcement demanded. Admiral Thosran stood slowly, his scarred hands gripping the podium. The truth that none of us want to acknowledge is that humanity was our sword and shield. While we debated and negotiated, they acted. While we counted costs, they paid prices. We convinced ourselves that we were the civilized galaxy, and they were the violent newcomers. But the reality was that we were the protected, and they were the protectors. Ambassador Kerner's mandibles clicked in irritation. Sentiment and nostalgia will not solve our current crisis. The hegemony has been preparing for expanded security responsibilities. Your fleets can patrol your own borders, interrupted Admiral Thosran with unusual bluntness. The hegemony has never committed ships to a single enforcement action beyond your own territory. Neither have most of the species represented in this chamber. The uncomfortable truth of his words created a tension that seemed to thicken the air itself. The Galactic Council had been very good at passing resolutions and signing treaties, but when it came to enforcement, they had relied heavily on human willingness to bear the burden of galactic peace. Commander Yelsan's hologram flickered as her transmission began to break up. Council, there's something else. The KRYL commander who destroyed our escort ships. He said something before we jumped to hyperspace. He said humanity got tired of being the galaxy's attack dog and decided to let us see how we'd fare without them. The transmission cut out, leaving the chamber in absolute silence. The implications of the commander's words struck each representative differently, but the common thread was a growing realization that humanity's withdrawal might not have been as spontaneous as they had assumed. Zethkar accessed his personal files through his neural interface, reviewing transcripts of his conversations with Sarah-chan in the months before humanity's departure. He had dismissed several of her comments at the time as mere frustration with council politics, but now they took on a more ominous significance. We keep getting pulled into conflicts where we're expected to provide the solutions while others provide the criticism, she had said during a late-night discussion about the Andorian crisis. My people are starting to ask why we're spending our blood and treasure to maintain a peace that others seem to take for granted. Another memory surfaced. A heated council session where the hegemony had accused human forces of using excessive violence in stopping a pirate fleet that had been raiding civilian shipping. The pirates had been using civilian shields and hiding among refugee convoys, making surgical strikes impossible. The human admiral had chosen to accept heavy casualties among his own forces rather than risk civilian deaths, but the hegemony had still filed formal complaints about human militarism. How many times had similar scenarios played out? How many times had humanity absorbed criticism for actions that others were unwilling to take themselves? Chancellor Veltar called for order as the chamber erupted into urgent conversations. The immediate crisis requires our attention. The KRYL expansion must be stopped before it destabilizes the entire Outer Rim. I'm calling for volunteers to contribute ships and personnel to an enforcement fleet. The response was predictably disappointing. Several core system species offered token contributions, outdated ships with skeleton crews, more symbolic than functional. The Outer Rim species, those most directly threatened by KRYL expansion, lacked the military capacity to mount an effective resistance. The few species with significant military capability found various excuses to avoid commitment. The hegemony requires 6 months to prepare our forces for deployment, Ambassador Krixna announced. We must ensure that our core territories remain secure before extending our reach. The Centaurian fleet is already overstretched maintaining border security, Admiral Thosran admitted reluctantly. We can spare perhaps 20 ships, but they would be operating far from our supply lines. Ambassador Trillex pulsed with frustrated energy. The Pacifican Assembly's technology is not suited for military operations. We can provide intelligence gathering and communication support, but we have no combat vessels. One by one, the representatives offered explanations for why their people could not shoulder the burden that humanity had carried alone for so long. The excuses were reasonable, the limitations real, but the cumulative effect was devastating. The Galactic Council, which had governed hundreds of species across thousands of systems, could not muster an effective response to a single aggressive species. As the session continued, reports began filtering in from across the galaxy. The KRYLL were not the only ones testing the boundaries of the new reality. Ancient territorial disputes that had been frozen by human-mediated agreements were heating up again. Trade routes that had been protected by human patrol squadrons were being raided with increasing frequency. Colonial settlements that had relied on human emergency response teams were finding themselves isolated and vulnerable. Dr. Hexera, the Council's chief xenosociologist, presented an analysis that painted an even bleaker picture. The four-armed academic's research had focused on the sociological impact of humanity's withdrawal, and her findings were disturbing. The galactic civilization we've known for the past 2 centuries was built on a foundation of human intervention, she explained, her data projections creating complex webs of interconnected relationships above the chamber floor. Humans didn't just provide military enforcement. They provided economic stability, technological innovation, and cultural exchange. Their withdrawal has created cascading failures across multiple systems. The projections showed trade networks collapsing as shipping companies lost confidence in route security. Research projects stalling as human scientific contributions vanished. Diplomatic initiatives failing as human mediation services disappeared. The galaxy had become so dependent on human participation that their absence was causing systemic breakdown. How long before we see complete collapse? Asked Chancellor Veltar, though his expression suggested he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. Dr. Hexera's 4 arms moved independently as she manipulated her data displays. Conservative estimates suggest widespread conflict within 2 years. Complete breakdown of galactic civilization within 5 to 10 years. These projections assume current trends continue without major intervention. Ambassador Zethkar stood slowly, his 4 eyes reflecting the weight of realization. We made a mistake, a catastrophic mistake. We treated humanity as junior partners despite their contributions, criticized their methods while benefiting from their results, and took their protection for granted while questioning their motives. Regret is counterproductive, Ambassador Krixna snapped. We must focus on solutions, not sentiment. The solution is obvious, Zethkar replied coldly. We need to bring humanity back to the Council. We need to admit our error and make amends. But even as he spoke the words, Zethkar knew they faced an unprecedented challenge. How do you apologize to a species that has vanished completely? How do you negotiate with people who refuse all communication? How do you repair a relationship when one party has simply walked away from the table? The chamber fell into contemplative silence as the magnitude of their situation became clear. They had managed to drive away the one species that had been holding galactic civilization together, and now they were facing the consequences of that loss. Outside the great windows of the council chamber, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the political crisis unfolding among their children. Somewhere among those stars, humanity was building a new existence, free from the burdens they had carried for so long. And in the chamber, 300 species began to grasp the true cost of losing their protectors. The age of human guardianship was over. The age of consequences had begun. The mining station Prosperity's Edge had been humanity's crowning achievement in the Kepler sector, a massive orbital facility that processed rare minerals from 3 different asteroid belts. Now it drifted silent and empty, its lights dark except for the emergency beacons that still pulsed their lonely warnings into the void. Captain Jorixtel of the Altarian survey vessel Deep Explorer studied the readings from his ship's sensors with growing confusion. The station showed no damage, no signs of conflict or catastrophe. It simply appeared to have been carefully powered down and abandoned, like a house whose owners had gone on vacation and might return at any moment. Life support is minimal but stable, reported his science officer, Lieutenant Cassandra. Her tentacles moved nervously across her control panel as she interpreted the sensor data. The station's automated systems are maintaining basic atmospheric conditions, but there's no one aboard. Not even maintenance robots. Jorek Stell's gill slits fluttered with anxiety. As part of the Council's investigation into humanity's disappearance, his ship had been assigned to survey former human installations in this sector. So far, they had found the same pattern everywhere. Complete abandonment without destruction, as if an entire species had simply decided to pack up and leave. Any signs of where they went? He asked, though he already knew the answer. Every human facility they had investigated told the same story. Careful shutdown procedures followed by total evacuation. No clues about destination or purpose. "Sir, you need to see this," called Engineer Plexton from his station near the back of the bridge. The insectoid's compound eyes were focused on a display showing the station's computer core. "I managed to access some of the station's logs. The humans didn't just leave randomly. This was planned." The main screen lit up with recovered data files, their contents sending a chill through the bridge crew. The logs showed months of preparation, with human personnel gradually being reassigned to other locations. Equipment had been carefully cataloged and either removed or placed in long-term storage. Most telling of all were the personal messages between human staff members, filled with references to the new home and starting fresh. "They knew," Jorek Stell whispered, his voice barely audible. "They planned this entire withdrawal months in advance." The implications were staggering. Humanity's departure from the Galactic Council hadn't been an emotional reaction to some specific incident. It had been a calculated decision, executed with the same methodical precision that had made human military operations so effective. Lieutenant Cassandra's tentacles went rigid with shock as she discovered another file. "Captain, there's something else." The humans left behind a complete database of their technological innovations. Production specifications, research data, even theoretical projects they never completed. "It's all here." The generous nature of this gift only made the abandonment more painful. Humanity had not left out of spite or anger. They had simply decided that the galactic community was no longer worth their continued participation. They had left their knowledge behind like parents leaving instructions for children who would have to learn to take care of themselves. 3 systems away, on the planet Nexus Prime, Ambassador Zethkar was discovering his own painful truths about humanity's departure. The Vortanian diplomatic mission had been granted permission to search the former human embassy, hoping to find clues about where their allies had gone. The embassy building stood pristine and undamaged in the government district, its modern architecture still impressive despite being empty. Human design had always favored clean lines and functional beauty, and the embassy had been a perfect example of their aesthetic principles. "The computers have been wiped clean," reported Senior Aide Vorthian, his scales shifting to disappointed blue. "Complete data purge, but done with surgical precision. They left behind anything that might be useful to the Council, but removed everything personal or specific to their operations." Zethkar wandered through the empty corridors, his memories making the silence even more oppressive. He had spent countless hours in these halls, working alongside human diplomats to resolve conflicts and negotiate agreements. The walls had once echoed with the sound of productive collaboration. Now, they reflected only the hollow footsteps of visitors trying to understand what they had lost. In what had been Sarah Chen's office, Zethkar found something the data purge had missed, a handwritten note tucked behind a picture frame. The paper was real tree pulp, a luxury item that showed how much humanity valued permanent records of important thoughts. "To whoever finds this," the note read in Sarah's careful handwriting, "please understand that our departure is not about anger or revenge. We have simply chosen a different path. The galaxy will find its own way forward, and perhaps that way will be better than what we could have provided. We wish you wisdom and peace in the choices ahead. Sarah Chun, final ambassador to the Galactic Council." The note's gentle tone somehow made it worse than any angry accusation could have been. Humanity had not left because they hated the galaxy. They had left because they no longer believed their presence made a positive difference. Meanwhile, in the Outer Rim, the consequences of humanity's absence were becoming impossible to ignore. The KRYLL Confederacy had expanded their operations beyond simple territorial acquisition. Reports were flooding in about forced labor camps, resource strip mining operations, and the systematic destruction of local cultures. Fleet Admiral Corvash of the United Border Defense Force stood on the bridge of his flagship Determination, studying tactical displays that showed the scope of the KRYLL expansion. The grizzled veteran had fought beside human forces in 3 different conflicts, and he understood better than most how badly the galaxy needed their return. The KRYLL have taken 6 more systems this week, reported his intelligence officer, Commander Desera. They're not even pretending to follow galactic law anymore. Latest reports suggest they're experimenting with some kind of new weapons technology. Corvash's expression darkened. What kind of technology? Unknown, sir. But the few survivors describe weapons that seem to ignore conventional shielding. Some kind of directed energy beam that passes through defensive fields like they weren't there. This news was particularly troubling because humanity had shared their shield technology freely with allied species. If the KRYLL had found a way to neutralize that protection, it meant they had capabilities that exceeded current galactic understanding. Any word from the Council about reinforcements? Corvash asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Commander Desera's facial tendrils drooped with disappointment. The emergency session ended with more promises and fewer ships. The hegemony now says they need 8 months to prepare their forces. The core worlds are requesting additional security guarantees before committing ships to Outer Rim operations. The Admiral's clawed hands gripped the edge of his command console until the metal groaned. They still don't understand. By the time they finish debating and negotiating, the KRYLL will control half the Outer Rim. Without human rapid response capabilities, we're fighting a losing battle. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from the border monitoring station at Grid Point 7. The holographic projection showed Lieutenant Thexnall, a young officer whose usually pristine appearance now showed signs of extreme stress. Admiral, we're detecting massive fleet movements in the KRYLL territories. Intelligence estimates suggest they're massing for a major offensive. Target appears to be the Centauri trade routes. Corvash felt his blood turn cold. The Centauri routes were the primary shipping lanes that connected the Outer Rim to the core systems. If the KRYLL gained control of those routes, they would have effective control over trade and communication across half the galaxy. How long before they reach the trade routes? He asked. At current speed, 36 hours, sir. But, Admiral, there's something else. Our deep space monitors detected something unusual just before the KRYLL fleet began moving. There was a massive hyperspace disturbance in unclaimed space, about 3 light-years from the KRYLL border. Whatever caused it was big, bigger than anything in our databases. The timing was too coincidental to ignore. Something had happened in deep space, and within hours the KRYLL had begun their largest military operation to date. Whether the 2 events were connected remained unclear, but Corvash had learned to trust his instincts over decades of military service. Put me through to the Council Emergency Channel, he ordered. They need to hear this. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was even more chaotic than the regular meetings had become. Representatives shouted over each other in a dozen different languages, while automatic translators struggled to keep up with the overlapping conversations. Chancellor Veltar's throat sac had inflated to dangerous proportions as he tried to maintain order. The KRYLL threat requires immediate action. Admiral Corvash, please repeat your assessment for the full council. The Admiral's holographic image appeared above the central podium, his battle-scarred face grim with determination. The KRYLL are moving to cut off the Centauri trade routes. If they succeed, they'll have effective control over commerce and communication between the Rim and the core. This isn't just territorial expansion anymore. This is a bid for galactic dominance. Ambassador Krixna's mandibles clicked with barely concealed panic. The hegemony cannot accelerate our deployment schedule. Our forces require adequate preparation time. Preparation time we don't have, Corvash replied bluntly. The attack begins in 36 hours. Either we stop them at the trade routes, or we lose control of half the galaxy. Zethkar stood slowly, his 4 eyes reflecting the emergency lighting that had been activated in the chamber. There's only one force in the galaxy that could mount an effective defense in such a short time frame. We need to contact humanity. The chamber fell silent. Everyone knew he was right, but no one knew how to accomplish the impossible task of contacting a species that had cut off all communication. Dr. Hexera approached the central podium, her research data creating new projections above the assembly. Based on my analysis of human departure patterns, I believe they may be monitoring our communications. They're too thorough to completely ignore galactic events that might affect their new settlements. What do you suggest? Asked Chancellor Veltar. A public broadcast, not a private diplomatic message, but a general announcement that acknowledges our errors and requests their assistance. If they're watching, they'll hear it. Ambassador Krius Mandibles clicked in derision. You want us to publicly grovel to a species that abandoned their responsibilities? I want us to publicly admit the truth, Zethkar replied firmly. We made mistakes. We took them for granted. We criticized them for doing the jobs we were unwilling to do ourselves. If there's any chance of earning their help, it starts with honesty about our failures. The vote was close, with several species abstaining and others voting against what they saw as a humiliating admission of weakness. But the crisis was too urgent for pride to override pragmatism. By a narrow margin, the Council authorized Chancellor Veltar to broadcast a message to all known human frequencies. As technicians prepared the equipment, reports continued to arrive from the Outer Rim. The KRYLL fleet was ahead of schedule and had apparently been reinforced by ships of unknown design. Ground-based intelligence suggested that they had developed not just new weapons, but new strategic doctrines that seemed specifically designed to counter traditional galactic defense tactics. Chancellor, we're ready for broadcast, announced the communication technician. Veltar approached the main podium, his amphibious features reflecting the gravity of the moment. Around him, 300 representatives waited in tense silence. This message would be broadcast across the galaxy, a public admission of the Council's failures, and a plea for help from the species they had driven away. Citizens of the galaxy, Veltar began, his voice carrying across the communication networks that linked thousands of worlds. The Galactic Council faces a crisis that threatens the peace and security we have known for generations. In our arrogance and ignorance, we failed to appreciate the contributions of humanity to our civilization. We criticized their methods while benefiting from their protection. We questioned their motives while taking their sacrifices for granted. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle across the listening galaxy. Now, faced with threats we cannot handle alone, we come before you with humility and desperation. To any human listening to this broadcast, we apologize for our failures. We acknowledge that we were wrong, and we ask, not as a matter of right, but as a plea for mercy for your help in preserving the peace you helped us build. The broadcast continued for several more minutes, with Veltar providing specific details about the KRYLL threat and the Council's inability to mount an adequate response. When it ended, the chamber remained silent, representatives staring at their communication panels as if willing them to show an incoming response. Hours passed with no reply. Admiral Korvash continued to monitor the KRYLL fleet's approach, watching helplessly as the most devastating attack in galactic history moved toward its target. The few ships the Council had managed to gather would be overwhelmed in minutes. Without human intervention, the attack would succeed, and the balance of power in the galaxy would shift permanently. Sir, called Lieutenant Thexnall from the monitoring station, his voice tight with excitement. I'm detecting new hyperspace signatures. Large formation, unknown configuration, approaching the KRYLL intercept point. Korvash felt his heart skip a beat. Can you identify the ships? Negative, sir. The energy signatures are unlike anything in our databases. But, Admiral, the formation patterns match human tactical doctrines. As the unknown fleet dropped out of hyperspace near the KRYLL force, one thing became immediately clear. Humanity had been watching. And they had decided, for reasons of their own, that this particular threat would not go unopposed. The question now was whether their intervention represented a return to galactic civilization or simply a final favor for the neighbors they were leaving behind. The battle was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. Admiral Korvash watched from his position at the edge of the Centauri trade routes as the human fleet engaged the KRYLL forces with a precision and ferocity that defied explanation. How many ships are we looking at? He asked his tactical officer, unable to keep the awe from his voice. Lieutenant Commander Vexeris manipulated her instruments with nervous efficiency. Approximately 200 vessels, Admiral. But, sir, these aren't the ships we remember. The energy signatures are completely different, more powerful, more advanced. On the tactical display, the human fleet moved like a single organism, their ships coordinating with flawless precision. The vessels themselves were sleek and angular, bearing little resemblance to the utilitarian designs humanity had used during their time in the Council. These ships looked like they had been built by a civilization that had spent years refining their military technology without interference or oversight. The KRYLL fleet, which had seemed invincible just hours before, was being systematically dismantled. Their new weapons, which had proven so effective against conventional galactic defenses, seemed to have no impact on human shielding. Worse, the humans appeared to have developed countermeasures specifically designed to neutralize KRYLL tactical advantages. "Sir, incoming transmission," announced the communications officer. "It's coming from the human flagship." The main screen lit up to reveal a figure that made Corvash's blood run cold. Admiral Marcus Chun, Sarah Chin's younger brother, stood on a bridge that looked more like a work of art than a military facility. His uniform bore insignia that no galactic database contained, and his expression carried the confidence of someone who knew exactly how powerful his fleet had become. "Admiral Corvash," Marcus said with a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It's been a while." "Admiral Chun," Corvash replied carefully. "Your assistance is most welcome, but unexpected." The Council was told that humanity had withdrawn from galactic affairs. "We have," Marcus confirmed. "This isn't galactic intervention. This is neighborhood cleanup. The KRYLL expansion has reached the edge of territory we've claimed for our own purposes. We're simply protecting our interests." The casual tone didn't fool Corvash. The human fleet's positioning was too precise, their timing too perfect. They had been monitoring galactic events closely and had prepared specifically for this confrontation. "Your territory?" Corvash asked. "Let's just say humanity has been busy this past year," Marcus replied. "We've established new homes, developed new capabilities, and made new friends. The galaxy you knew was just the beginning of our story, not the end." Before Corvash could ask for clarification, the tactical display showed the KRYLL flagship exploding in a spectacular cascade of light. The remaining KRYLL ships began a desperate retreat, but the human fleet pursued them with methodical determination. None of the invading forces would survive to report what they had encountered. On Nexus Prime, the Council chamber buzzed with excited conversation as news of the human intervention spread. Chancellor Veltar struggled to maintain order while representatives shouted questions and demands for information. "Order! Order!" he called, his throat sac now dangerously distended. "We have received confirmation that human forces have engaged and defeated the KRYLL invasion fleet. The immediate threat to the trade routes has been eliminated." Ambassador Crixna clicked her mandibles urgently. "This proves that humanity still considers itself part of galactic civilization. We should open immediate negotiations for their return to the Council." "I'm not certain that's what this proves," Zethkar interjected, his four eyes focused on the tactical reports streaming in from the battle zone. "Look at the engagement parameters. Human forces appeared precisely when needed, eliminated the threat with overwhelming force, and are now withdrawing without attempting contact with Council forces. This wasn't intervention. This was extermination." Dr. Hexera approached the central podium with data that confirmed Zethkar's suspicions. Analysis of the battle footage shows human tactical doctrines that are completely different from anything they used during their Council membership. Their ships, weapons, and strategies have evolved far beyond what we knew. The implications were staggering. In just 1 year, humanity had not only rebuilt their civilization outside galactic oversight, but had advanced their military capabilities to a level that made them effectively untouchable. The species that had once struggled to gain respect among galactic powers had become something far more dangerous than any Council member had imagined. "There's something else," Dr. Hexera continued, her forearms manipulating complex data displays. "Spectral analysis of the human ships suggests they're using materials and energy sources that don't exist in known space. They found something out there in the deep dark, something that's made them much more powerful than they were when they left." Ambassador Trillex pulsed with concerned energy. The question becomes whether this enhanced humanity represents a potential ally or a new threat to galactic stability. The answer came sooner than anyone expected. 3 days after the battle, Every major communication network in the galaxy received the same message simultaneously. The transmission bypassed all security protocols and appeared on screens across thousands of worlds, from the most secure military facilities to ordinary civilian communications devices. The image that appeared was not of a familiar human leader, but of a woman wearing robes that seemed to shimmer with their own internal light. Her features were unmistakably human, but there was something else there, an authority and presence that suggested she spoke for powers beyond conventional understanding. "People of the Galactic Council," she began, her voice carrying a resonance that seemed to vibrate in the bones of every listener. "I am Director Elena Vasquez, speaking for the Human Collective. Our recent intervention against the KRYL expansion was not a gesture of renewed alliance or an invitation to resumed relations." The chamber fell silent as representatives struggled to process what they were hearing. The Human Collective, not the Terran Federation or the Human Alliance, but something entirely new. Humanity has moved beyond the limitations that defined our previous existence, Director Vasquez continued. "We have found new homes among the stars, developed new capabilities, and formed new partnerships with entities that exist beyond your current understanding. We are no longer the species that sought membership in your council." The transmission included holographic displays of human settlements that defied comprehension. Cities floating in empty space, powered by stars that had been somehow harnessed for construction purposes. Vast ships that appear to be grown rather than built, their organic curves suggesting biotechnology far beyond anything in galactic databases. "However," Vasquez said, and the slight smile in her voice offered the first hope the Council had felt since humanity's departure, "we remember our origins with fondness. The galaxy that gave us our first taste of civilization will always hold a special place in our development. Therefore, we offer the following arrangement." The terms she outlined were unlike any diplomatic proposal in galactic history. Humanity would not rejoin the Council, but they would provide protection for galactic civilization from threats beyond its capability to handle. In exchange, they requested complete autonomy in territories they had claimed in deep space and a guarantee that no galactic power would interfere with human operations or attempt to contact human settlements. "Consider this offer carefully," Vasquez warned. "We will defend the galaxy from existential threats, but we will no longer serve as your police force or mediator. You must learn to handle your own internal conflicts and governance challenges. Our protection extends to threats that could destroy galactic civilization, not to political disputes or territorial disagreements." The transmission ended with coordinates for a neutral meeting point where the Council could send a single representative to discuss implementation details. The location was in deep space, far from any known star system, a place that suggested humanity's reach now extended far beyond traditional galactic boundaries. When the transmission ended, the Council chamber erupted in argument. Some representatives saw the offer as humanity's gracious return to galactic affairs. Others viewed it as an ultimatum from a species that had become dangerously powerful during their absence. Ambassador Zeth Carr stood slowly, his four eyes reflecting the complexity of emotions he felt. "We need to understand what humanity has become before we can decide whether to accept their offer. They're not the same species that left us a year ago. They're stronger," pointed out Admiral Thosran. "Their intervention against the KRYL proved that. Whatever they've found or developed, it's given them capabilities that exceed anything in Council space. Ambassador Krixnas mandibles clutteret nervously. But strength without accountability is tyranny. What happens when human interests conflict with galactic needs? What guarantee do we have that their protection won't become domination?" The debate continued for hours, but the underlying reality was inescapable. The galaxy faced threats it could not handle alone, and humanity had just demonstrated that they possessed the power to address those threats. The question was whether accepting their protection was worth the cost of acknowledging their superiority. Dr. Hexera presented her final analysis of the human transmission, and her findings were deeply disturbing. The technology displayed in their settlements suggests they've made contact with something beyond our current understanding of physics. The energy signatures, the construction methods, even the biological modifications apparent in Director Vasquez herself. None of it matches known scientific principles. "What are you suggesting?" asked Chancellor Veltar. I'm suggesting that humanity's withdrawal from galactic civilization wasn't just about politics or disappointment. They found something out there in the deep dark, something that changed them fundamentally. The humans who made that offer aren't quite the same species that left us. The implications sent a chill through the chamber. Humanity had always been known for their adaptability and rapid development, but what Dr. Hexera described suggested evolution on a scale that challenged basic understanding of biological and technological change. The question, Zethkar said quietly, is whether we're being offered protection by our former allies or whether we're being annexed by something that used to be human. As the debate raged, reports continued to arrive from across the galaxy. The KRYLL survivors who had escaped the human assault were spreading stories of impossible weapons and ships that seemed to ignore the laws of physics. Other aggressive species were suddenly reconsidering expansion plans as word spread about humanity's overwhelming victory. But more disturbing were reports from deep space monitoring stations about unusual readings in sectors near human territory. Energy signatures that suggested massive construction projects, gravitational anomalies that implied the manipulation of celestial bodies, and communication patterns that used principles beyond current galactic understanding. Chancellor Veltar called for a recess to allow representatives to consult with their home governments. The decision about humanity's offer would require more than a simple council vote. It would require each species to decide whether they trusted their former allies or feared their new capabilities. As the representatives filed out of the chamber, Zethkar remained behind, staring at the coordinates humanity had provided for their meeting point. The location was marked as empty space in all galactic databases, but something told him it wouldn't be empty when the Council's representative arrived. Humanity had changed in ways that challenged every assumption about their nature and intentions. The species that had once sought acceptance as junior members of galactic civilization had become something that transcended traditional categories of power and purpose. The only question now was whether their offer of protection was a gift from old friends or the first step in a transformation of galactic civilization that would leave no species unchanged. Ambassador Zethkar had volunteered for what many considered a suicide mission. As the Council's sole representative to meet with the transformed humanity, he piloted his small diplomatic vessel toward coordinates that showed nothing but empty space on every galactic chart. His ship's instruments detected no planets, no stations, no obvious signs of civilization. Yet the coordinates humanity had provided were exact to 17 decimal places. Approaching designated coordinates, he announced to his ship's AI, more for his own comfort than any practical purpose. The silence of deep space felt oppressive after a lifetime spent in the bustling core systems. Warning, his ship's computer announced with mechanical calm. Detecting massive gravitational anomalies ahead. Source unknown. Recommend course adjustment. Zethkar's four eyes focused on his display screens with growing amazement. Space itself seemed to be bending in impossible patterns ahead of his ship. Reality twisted and folded in ways that violated every principle of physics he understood. Then he saw it. A structure materialized out of what had appeared to be empty space, its vast bulk defying comprehension. The station, if it could be called that, looked like someone had captured a small star and wrapped it in crystalline architecture that stretched for hundreds of kilometers in every direction. Energy flowed through translucent walls in patterns that suggested the entire structure was alive. Incoming transmission, announced his computer. Origin, unknown structure ahead. The communication screen activated to show a figure that made Zethkar's scale shift to confused purple. The being appeared human in basic shape, but her skin held an inner luminescence that pulsed with her heartbeat. Her eyes were the color of deep space, filled with points of light that moved like distant stars. "Welcome, Ambassador Zethkar," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in dimensions beyond normal space. "I am Director Elena Vasquez. Please allow our guidance systems to bring you aboard safely." Zethkar's ship moved without his control, drawn by forces that felt both technological and organic. His instruments registered impossible readings, gravity fields that shifted direction without warning, energy patterns that operated outside the electromagnetic spectrum, and structural materials that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The docking bay that received his ship was larger than most planetary cities, filled with vessels that bore no resemblance to any known design. Some ships appeared to be grown from crystalline matrices, their surfaces rippling with organic patterns. Others looked like captured comets, ice, and rock held together by webs of brilliant energy. Director Vasquez met him at the airlock, and Zethkar immediately understood that humanity's transformation went far beyond technological advancement. Her presence felt different, larger than her physical form suggested, as if she existed partially in spaces his senses couldn't perceive. "You have questions," she said with a slight smile. "Walk with me, and I'll try to provide answers." The corridors of the station defied architectural logic. Walls curved in directions that should have been impossible, and spaces seemed to expand or contract based on need rather than fixed dimensions. Gardens grew in areas where there should have been vacuum, their plants reaching toward light sources that existed in spectrums beyond visible illumination. "What happened to you out here?" Zethkar asked, struggling to maintain his diplomatic composure. This level of advancement shouldn't be possible in such a short time. "Time," Vasquez replied thoughtfully, "is more flexible than your people understand. We encountered entities in deep space that exist outside conventional temporal flow. Working with them, we've experienced decades of development in what you perceive as a single year." They passed a vast window that looked out onto impossible vistas. Zethkar could see human settlements built around captured asteroids, spaceborne cities that moved between dimensions, and construction projects that appeared to be reshaping reality itself. "The beings you call humans were always meant for something greater than galactic politics," Vasquez continued. "Our partnership with the Council was a learning experience, not a destination. We needed to understand civilized society before we could transcend it." They entered what appeared to be a command center, though the technology bore no resemblance to anything in Zethkar's experience. Living walls pulsed with information streams, and operators who looked human but moved within human grace manipulated controls that existed partially in other dimensions. "Show him the archive," Vasquez instructed one of her subordinates. A holographic display materialized, showing the galactic situation with terrifying clarity. The KRYLL expansion had been only the beginning. Dozens of aggressive species were testing boundaries, trade routes were collapsing, and ancient territorial disputes were flaring into open warfare. "The galaxy is coming apart," Zethkar observed with growing horror. "Without human enforcement of the major treaties, everything is falling into chaos." "Exactly as we predicted," Vasquez confirmed. "Your civilization was built on a foundation of control violence. When that control disappeared, the underlying violence remained." The display zoomed to show specific crisis points across known space. The hegemony was fighting 3 different border wars. Core system species were hoarding resources while outer rim colonies faced starvation. Ancient grudges that had been suppressed by fear of human intervention were erupting into genocidal conflicts. "This is why we made our offer," Vasquez explained. "Not because we feel responsible for your problems, but because total galactic collapse would create ripple effects that could threaten our own development. And if we refuse your protection?" Vasquez gestured toward another display that showed projection models of galactic civilization under various scenarios. The patterns were grim, complete breakdown within 5 years, followed by centuries of Dark Age barbarism. "Without external intervention, your species will destroy each other," she said simply. "The mathematical models are quite clear. The only question is whether that intervention comes from us or from something less benevolent." Zethkar felt his blood chill. Something else. The displays changed to show readings from deep space monitoring stations at the galaxy's edge. Massive objects were moving in the void between galaxies, their energy signatures unlike anything in known databases. "The universe contains entities that view developing civilizations as resources to be harvested," Vasquez explained. "Your galaxy's chaos is attracting their attention. If we don't stabilize the situation soon, you may face threats that make the KRYLL look like minor irritants." The ambassador's 4 eyes struggled to process the scope of what he was seeing. Humanity had not only transcended their former limitations, but had gained awareness of cosmic-level threats that existed beyond galactic understanding. "Why do you care?" he asked. "If humanity has become something greater than we ever imagined, why risk yourselves for species that drove you away?" Vasquez was quiet for a long moment, her star-filled eyes reflecting depths of thought that seemed to span eons. "Because growth requires roots, Ambassador. No matter how far we evolve, we remember where we came from. The galaxy gave us our first lessons in civilization, cooperation, and the cost of peace. We won't let that teacher die while we have the power to prevent it. She led him to another section of the station, where the architecture became even more impossible. Here, Zethkar could see humans working alongside entities that defied description. Beings of pure energy, creatures that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and intelligences that communicated through manipulation of reality itself. These are our partners, Vasquez explained. The Transcendent Collective, species that have moved beyond physical limitations into new forms of existence. They've been waiting eons for a species capable of joining them while maintaining connection to its origins. And humans qualified? Apparently. Our capacity for adaptation, combined with our stubborn refusal to abandon our core values, made us suitable candidates for elevation. But the process requires maintaining connections to our past, including the civilizations that shaped us. They reached what appeared to be the station's core, a vast chamber where reality itself seemed to be under construction. Streams of pure possibility flowed through crystalline matrices while human technicians guided the process with instruments that existed partially in other dimensions. This is where we build new realities, Vasquez said with obvious pride. Pocket universes designed as safe havens for developing species. Dimensional constructs that allow faster-than-light travel without the risks of conventional hyperspace. Even artificial worlds that can support life in forms your people haven't imagined. The scope of humanity's transformation was overwhelming. They had become something that approached godlike capability while somehow retaining their essential character. The offer we made to the Council is genuine, Vasquez continued. We will protect galactic civilization from existential threats. But protection comes with conditions. You must learn to govern yourselves without relying on our intervention for every dispute. You must develop your own capabilities for maintaining peace. And you must accept that humanity is no longer available as a convenient scapegoat for difficult decisions. Zethkar nodded slowly, finally, understanding the true nature of humanity's proposal. You're offering to be guardians, not governors. Precisely. We'll stop the galaxy-ending threats, but you'll have to handle everything else yourselves. It's time for galactic civilization to grow up. They returned to the docking bay through corridors that seemed shorter than they had been during the inbound journey. Zethkar's ship waited exactly where he had left it, though his instruments showed impossible readings from the brief time he had been away. There's one more thing you should know, Vasquez said as they reached his airlock. The entities we work with have identified 17 other galaxies facing similar crises. If our partnership with your people proves successful, we'll be taking this model to other civilizations that need similar guidance. The implications staggered him. Humanity wasn't just protecting one galaxy. They were becoming shepherds of civilizations across the universe. What do you need from the Council to make this work? Simple acknowledgement that you accept our terms, Vasquez replied. We don't need treaties or formal agreements. Just a public statement that the Galactic Council recognizes humanity's independence and welcomes our protection against existential threats. As his ship departed the impossible station, Zethkar watched it fade back into apparent nothingness. His instruments showed only empty space, though he had just spent hours in a structure that challenged the foundations of reality. The return journey to Nexus Prime gave him time to process what he had experienced. Humanity had become something unprecedented, a species that had transcended physical limitations while maintaining emotional connections to their origins. They offered protection not as conquerors or overlords, but as elder siblings watching over younger family members. When he arrived at the council chamber, the sight of 300 species arguing over territorial disputes and trade regulations seemed almost pathetic compared to the cosmic scope of what humanity was building. But that was exactly why their offer mattered. These small, squabbling civilizations were capable of growth, but only if they survived their current chaos. What did you find out there? Chancellor Veltar asked as soon as Zethkar entered the chamber. I found our future, he replied quietly, and discovered that humanity is offering us the chance to have one. The presentation of his findings took 6 hours and left the council in stunned silence. The evidence was undeniable. Humanity had become something beyond their previous understanding, but their offer of protection was genuine and came without hidden costs. The vote, when it finally came, was unanimous. For the first time in Council history, all 300 species agreed on a single resolution. They would accept humanity's protection and work to develop their own capabilities for maintaining galactic peace. As the session ended, Zethkar looked up at the stars visible through the chamber's great windows. Somewhere out there, humanity was building new realities and shepherding civilizations across the universe. They had moved beyond the need for recognition or gratitude, but they hadn't forgotten where they came from. The age of human guardianship had indeed ended, but the age of human transcendence had begun, and it offered hope for a universe filled with growing civilizations that just needed someone to watch over them as they learned to stand on their own. 5 years had passed since the Galactic Council's acceptance of humanity's Protection Pact, and the galaxy had transformed in ways no one had expected. The constant threat of war that had loomed over civilization for centuries had receded, replaced by something unprecedented in galactic history: genuine peace. Chancellor Veltar stood at the observation deck of the Council's new headquarters station, watching ships from hundreds of species move through space lanes that were now completely secure. The aging amphibian's throat sac had returned to normal size for the first time in years, no longer constantly inflated with stress. The quarterly reports show continued improvement across all sectors, announced his aide, Senior Coordinator Thelvos. The young Altarian's tentacles moved efficiently across her data pad as she summarized the latest statistics. Trade volume is up 30% from pre-withdrawal levels. Piracy incidents have dropped to effectively zero, and we've had no major territorial disputes in 18 months. Veltar nodded, but his expression remained thoughtful. The peace was real, but it had come at a cost that some species were still struggling to accept. Learning to handle their own conflicts without the possibility of human intervention had forced galactic civilization to develop new skills in diplomacy, compromise, and genuine cooperation. The transformation hadn't been easy. In the first year after accepting human protection, several species had tested the boundaries of the new arrangement. The hegemony had attempted to annex a disputed system, expecting that humanity would intervene to restore the previous boundaries. When no human ships appeared, they had found themselves facing a coalition of affected species who were no longer willing to tolerate aggressive expansion. The resulting conflict had lasted 3 months and ended with the hegemony surrendering territory they had held for decades. More importantly, it had ended with a new understanding. Galactic civilization would have to police itself because their guardians were only concerned with existential threats. Ambassador Zethkar approached the observation deck, his 4 eyes reflecting satisfaction with the changes he had witnessed. Now, serving as the Council's Director of Interspecies Relations, he had become the architect of the new diplomatic frameworks that were making self-governance possible. The Centauri Accords have been signed, he announced with obvious pleasure. That's the last of the major territorial disputes resolved. Every species now has clearly defined borders that all parties have accepted. How did you manage it? Veltar asked. The Centauri situation had seemed hopeless just months ago, with 4 different species claiming overlapping territorial rights. By making it clear that there was no appeal process, Zethkar replied with a slight smile. When everyone knows that human intervention isn't available for territorial disputes, suddenly, compromise becomes much more attractive than conflict. The new diplomatic reality had forced fundamental changes in how species interacted. The threat of human disapproval had been replaced by the threat of isolation from an increasingly cooperative galactic community. Species that refused to work within the new frameworks found themselves cut off from trade networks, scientific exchanges, and mutual defense agreements. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent chime from the station's communication system. The main display screen activated to show Admiral Korvash, now serving as head of the Integrated Defense Force, the galaxy's first truly cooperative military organization. Chancellor, we're receiving reports of unusual readings from the Outer Rim, the old warrior announced. Long-range sensors are detecting massive objects approaching from intergalactic space. Whatever they are, they're big enough to show up on gravitational sensors from 3 sectors away. Veltar felt his throat sac begin to inflate with familiar stress. How big are we talking about? Initial estimates suggest structures the size of small moons, sir. Multiple contacts approaching in formation. ETA to the galaxy's outer edge is approximately 6 months. This was exactly the kind of threat that humanity had warned about, something that could threaten the entire galaxy. Under their protection agreement, this situation would definitely qualify for intervention. Any word from our guardians? Veltor asked carefully. Even after 5 years, discussing humanity's enhanced status felt awkward. Negative, sir. But, based on their past responses, I expect we'll hear from them when they're ready to act. The transmission ended, leaving the observation deck in tense silence. The peaceful years had made it easy to forget that the galaxy existed in a dangerous universe filled with threats beyond conventional understanding. 2 days later, those threats became terrifyingly real. The objects approaching from intergalactic space revealed themselves to be ships of impossible size, each one larger than most space stations. They moved with purpose and intelligence, their courses adjusted to intercept major population centers across the galaxy's outer rim. Dr. Hexera, now serving as the Council's Director of Xenological Studies, presented her analysis to an emergency session of the full assembly. Her 4 arms moved nervously as she manipulated displays showing the approaching fleet. Based on energy signatures and structural analysis, these vessels appear to be designed for large-scale resource extraction, she announced. The entities controlling them view inhabited planets as mining sites, with the existing populations as potential slave labor. The implications were clear. This wasn't an invasion in the traditional sense, it was harvesting. The approaching entities planned to strip the galaxy of resources and enslave or eliminate its inhabitants in the process. What are our defensive capabilities? Asked Ambassador Crixnaw, her mandibles clicking with barely controlled fear. The years of peace had been good to the hegemony, but they had also made the reality of existential threats feel distant and abstract. Admiral Corvash's expression was grim as he delivered his assessment. The integrated defense force consists of ships from 30 different species, but even combined, our firepower would be insufficient against vessels of this size. We're looking at a situation where conventional military response is essentially meaningless. The chamber fell into worried silence. For all their growth in diplomacy and cooperation, galactic civilization had remained dependent on human protection for threats of this magnitude. Now they faced the test of whether their guardians would honor the agreement they had made 5 years ago. The answer came 18 hours later. Reality twisted in the space between the approaching harvester fleet and the galaxy's outer rim. Impossibilities manifested as human ships materialized from dimensions that shouldn't exist, their forms even more advanced than the vessel Zethkar had seen 5 years earlier. The human fleet that emerged defied every principle of physics the Council understood. Ships that appeared to be made of crystallized starlight moved alongside vessels that looked like they had been grown from the fabric of space itself. Energy patterns flowed between them in configurations that suggested the entire fleet was a single living entity. At the center of the formation was a structure that could only be described as a mobile reality matrix, a ship that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously while remaining anchored in normal space. The communication that followed was broadcast simultaneously to every inhabited world in the galaxy. Director Elena Vasquez appeared on screens across thousands of planets, her appearance even more transformed than before. She looked like a human-shaped constellation, her form composed of living starlight that moved with her gestures. Citizens of the galaxy, she began, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated across multiple dimensions. The threat approaching your civilization represents exactly the kind of existential danger we committed to address. These entities are known to us. They call themselves the Harvest Collective, and they have consumed 17 galaxies over the past 1,000,000 years. The displays accompanying her transmission showed the scope of the approaching threat in terrifying detail. The Harvest Collective operated on a galactic scale, treating entire civilizations as temporary obstacles to resource extraction. However, Vasquez continued with a slight smile that contained depths of confidence. They have never encountered a galaxy under transcendent protection. Watch and learn what it means to be guardians of civilization. The battle that followed lasted exactly 17 minutes and redefined galactic understanding of what was possible. The human fleet engaged the Harvest Collective using weapons and tactics that existed outside conventional physics. Ships fired beams of crystallized possibility that rewrote the target's fundamental structure. Defensive systems created pockets of altered reality where the laws of physics favored the defenders. Most incredibly, the humans didn't just destroy the Harvester's ships, they converted them. Massive vessels that had been designed for destruction and enslavement were transformed into peaceful exploration craft, their crews' mindsets altered to value cooperation over consumption. Impossible, whispered Dr. Hexera as she watched the transformation process. They're not just winning the battle. They're fundamentally changing their enemy's nature. By the time the engagement ended, the Harvest Collective had ceased to exist as a threat. Their ships had been converted into beneficial entities that would spend eternity exploring and protecting developing civilizations rather than consuming them. Director Vasquez appeared again on galactic communication networks, her expression serene despite having just orchestrated the transformation of an ancient enemy. This is what transcendence means, she explained. We don't just defeat threats, we transform them into solutions. The entities that came to harvest your galaxy will now spend their existence protecting other civilizations from similar dangers. She paused, looking directly into the camera with eyes that held the depth of cosmic understanding. This intervention concludes our formal protection agreement with the Galactic Council. You have learned to govern yourselves, to resolve conflicts through cooperation rather than force, and to build a civilization based on mutual respect rather than fear. You no longer need guardians. The announcement sent shockwaves through the galaxy. After 5 years of protection, humanity was declaring their job complete. However, Vasquez continued before the panic could spread. This doesn't mean we're abandoning you. Humanity will always maintain a connection to the galaxy of our birth. If you face another existential threat beyond your capabilities, send a message to the coordinates we're transmitting. We'll hear it, wherever we are in the universe. New information flooded galactic networks, locations of human monitoring stations, communication protocols for emergency contact, and detailed databases of threat profiles that might require intervention. But understand, Vasquez concluded, our purpose now extends far beyond a single galaxy. We're working with the Transcendent Collective to shepherd civilizations across the universe. Other species in distant galaxies need the same guidance and protection you once required. The transmission ended with images of incomprehensible scope. Human ships moving between galaxies like travelers crossing city districts, working alongside entities that existed on scales of time and space that challenged understanding. In the days that followed, galactic civilization absorbed the reality of its new independence. The fear that had initially accompanied humanity's announcement gradually transformed into something unexpected: pride. They had graduated. After centuries of dependence on human protection and intervention, galactic civilization had developed the maturity to stand on its own. The species that had once required constant supervision had become capable of maintaining peace through their own efforts. Chancellor Veltar stood again on the observation deck, watching the same peaceful traffic patterns that had become routine over the past 5 years. But now those patterns represented something different. Not peace maintained by external force, but peace chosen by civilizations that had learned its value. What do you think comes next? Asked Zethkar, joining him at the viewing window. Whatever we choose, Veltar replied thoughtfully. For the first time in our history, the galaxy's future is entirely in our own hands. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the political transformations taking place among their children. But somewhere among those distant lights, humanity continued its work of shepherding civilizations toward transcendence, carrying the lessons they had learned from their own imperfect but ultimately successful relationship with galactic society. The age of human transcendence had reached its fulfillment. The age of galactic independence had begun, and across the universe, other developing civilizations would benefit from the model of growth, conflict, and eventual maturity that had been established in one small galaxy where humans had once sought nothing more than acceptance among the stars. The greatest error had been thinking that humanity needed the galaxy more than the galaxy needed humanity. The greatest truth was that both had needed each other to become what they were meant to be. Now, each would continue their separate journeys toward whatever destiny awaited civilizations brave enough to reach beyond the boundaries of what they thought possible.